Hello, I'm Bill McDonald. Welcome to Center Stage, Charlotte County. And our guest is James Abraham. He runs a company and service called Book Broker Publishers. And before we get into all the amazing things you do, I want to highlight that you have just edited a book. This is the centennial of Charlotte County. We're 100 years old now. And you edited this fantastic book about the history of Charlotte County.
Yes, I did. This book came about, it started about 4 years ago. I happened to be at the Florida Air Show, and Brian Gleason, the county public information officer, was running the county booth right next to me. And he mentioned that the centennial's coming up, and maybe I should think about doing a book. So I'm a pack rat and a former journalist, and so I already had a lot of memorabilia. So I started collecting more, pointing toward this. Last year, I found out the county would not do an official centennial book. So at that point, I had a real decision. Should I invest in doing this because I'm a book publisher and I know how to do it, or should I try to get corporate help? I decided to go ahead and work on this book. And so I spent 10 months actually doing the research, the editing. I solicited about 30 people from the community who are experts in their field or constitutional officers to write essays to complement the narrative that I produced. And so here we are. The book is out now, and I'm very proud of it.
It's a beautiful book, and if people want to get a hold of a copy of this, what would you suggest?
Buy local at Copperfish. And they're down on Virginia Street in Punta Gorda, or it's available on Amazon. So either one, Bill.
Either one. Was the research daunting in terms of capturing Charlotte County's history, or did it all kind of fall into place once you started?
First, I must praise the county's historical services, particularly Jennifer Zobline. She's young, very intelligent, and she understands the importance of how to help on a project like this. She gave me full access to microfilm, so I was able to read weekly the Punta Gorda Herald. This community was fortunate enough, Bill, to have a newspaper older than the county.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I had that source of record. Right. At the same time, the county maintains an excellent archive of photographs, postcards, graphic images, in large part because of the County Historical Society. And so a lot of the information was readily available on the internet. The other great thing is there are people who were very anxious to share their lives and their memorabilia with me. So there are some pages that read like a family photo album. And so the research, the most daunting part of the research, Bill, were some people who did not want their family stories told. I'll just speak to one, which is a good case in point. Leo Wiltitsky.
Sure.
Wiltitsky, people know him as a lawyer, newspaper editor. Leo Wiltitsky served in the state legislature, but he lost his seat because he sacrificed himself to enact a fair funding formula for public education. This was the first fair formula. Prior to this, if you were from a rich county, the schools naturally were better. Poor county, like Charlotte, at one point Charlotte only had like 3 schools in the whole county. What Wiltitsky came up with was a formula by which, when you paid into the state tax system, certain monies from that would be used to offset the lower revenue of poor districts. It was a great plan, perfect, but just before the legislature took it up, Governor Fuller Warren told him, we're going to have a tax to make this happen.
Oh, and then his name got associated with the tax.
To the point where there was an old story going around about merchants would set a cup on the cash, next to the cash register with a sign on it, Wiltitsky tax.
Oh, jeez.
That was the last time he ever held elective office. And so he sacrificed himself for generations yet unborn who benefit from that formula. There have been subsequent formulas, but Wiltitsky's was the first. Now, his family would not talk to me, but that story was too important not to be told. And so I had to do some triangulation. Now, my mentor is Vernon Peoples, and Vernon, of course, is long gone. But as I was trying to track that story down, you know what I ran across? An interview by Vernon Peoples of Leo Wojcicki, where he tells that exact same story. And so
Wow,
that was
that's-
providential. And so the daunting part of the research, basically people who would not talk to me. But other than that, because our history is so fresh, we're talking, what, 100 years?
100 years, yeah.
It's accessible. So I enjoyed the process, and thanks to the county, the resources are right there if you want to go get them.
Well, that's great to know that the information is out there.
Yes, it is.
And we look forward to reading your book. Now, your company, Bookbroker Publishers, you help aspiring writers to write, edit, and publish their manuscripts into books. What is that process like?
I really enjoy it. I call it being a cool uncle, being a midwife, being a friend. I enjoy the written word. And one of my heroes was Maxwell Perkins. He was Hemingway's editor. He edited Thomas Wolfe, edited F. Scott Fitzgerald. And he became their friends. Like when, Fitzgerald was out of money, he would help him out. There's a good story about Thomas Wolfe showed up in a truck with his manuscript, and by the time Perkins got through it, he went home in a cab. So he was all of those things. And I understand that the written word is precious.
It is.
It's so private that when you share it, if you don't have the right element, that whole creative impulse could die. And so I like to hold writers' hands. Sometimes you got to kick them in the butt gently.
Right.
And just take them through the process so that their voice isn't lost. Now, that's the sort of creative part. The real practical part I take care of. For example, if you look at this book here, you see a lot of graphics and charts. I put that together so that the product itself is accessible. People would want to read it. And so basically my business runs the whole gamut, from ghostwriting to coaching to actually physically publishing books.
Wow. What are some of the stumbling blocks that aspiring writers find themselves up against when they're thinking about writing a...
You know the biggest one? Starting at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, how can you do that? Where is the beginning? For example, I could say I was born, but I was born in Baltimore because my folks lived in Baltimore. Why did they live in, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you don't start at the beginning. What I ask people to do is start at the most impactful moment, your moment of truth, your road to Damascus. Start there at the thing that was your transformation point. It might be the first time you had sex, the first time you shaved, when you joined the army, when you almost died.
Right.
And then you work forward and backwards from there. And suddenly it gets so easy,
So those quintessential moments are the spark, maybe, of
Yes.
the story.
Yes, they are. Because that's the moment when you're born again. And what we're talking about is a memoir. You'll have to tell what happened in the memoir. And so the point where you're born again, the transformational moment, should be the point at which you start the memoir. You're at the top of the hill.
Right.
And it's easy to climb down. A lot easier to go down than to go up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, one thing I tried to do in this book was cross genres. And what I mean by that is what I described just now is something that people would say it only works for memoirs. No, it'll work for a novel as well. If you could identify what the novel is about a guy who kills somebody and gets away, that's the high point. Once you have that scene or that thought, how they get there, what happens next.
Sure.
You see how, again, you're
Absolutely,
climbing down. Yeah.
So, and you mentioned memoirs and novels. Are your clients and past clients equally distributed among memoirs, novels, biographies, or do you have one that more people?
None predominates. I do children's book, humorous books, a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything, yeah.
Yeah, and I like that because it keeps me fresh. And I do believe in crossing genres. Like one person told me this book reads like a romance novel. And I said, yeah, that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted. You know, I don't want people to think this is a history full of dead people.
Right.
I want them to follow these people. And if they follow them, suddenly they understand that history, it never really dies. We're
No.
still living it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was some novel, and it was a quotation from Eugene O'Neill. There is no future; it's only the past happening again and again.
Yes,
and that's
it is.
was the quotation of the start of the book. I thought that was
Yes, I
interesting.
mean, the bottom line to that is we keep getting born.
Yeah,
So,
right.
Yeah.
Now, as far as why people write a book, maybe because they've always wanted to be an author, but there's probably other reasons as well. What reasons have you discovered among your clients of why they want to write a book?
The first time a baby screams, a baby's expressing himself. It's as simple as, you know, my diaper needs changing, or I'm hungry, or I want to be held. And so we're inculcated with the ability, the need, and the social conformity of expressing ourselves. But by the same token, there are a lot of people in this world. For example, I grew up with 3 sisters, and they did most of the talking. And so it's easy for us to lose our voices. And what I find is when we lose our voices, it comes out in ways that may not be the best ways. Aggression, depression. We all have needs and feelings. And I believe writing is probably the best way to communicate those needs and feelings. And so I've done some pretty bad books, and I've read some pretty bad books, but I respect those authors willing to bare their soul and to put it on paper. It takes a lot of courage. But I say, this is self-serving, but I say everyone needs to write a book. Get it out there,
Get
and
it
you'll
out
feel
there,
a
yeah.
lot better. So
Exactly.
yes.
Well, let's dive a little bit into your background. I believe in college you were a history major. Is that
Yes.
correct? And I think the general notion of somebody in writing and editing is an English, American English or English literature or something along those lines. But I was thinking a history degree, history studies, is a great background for being an author and an editor because of the narrative and the critical thinking involved. And so did you find that to be the case in terms of your studies and then later be going
Yeah.
into writing?
When I was 7 years old, I wrote my first story. And I had a crush on my second grade teacher. And so I was so proud of the story I wrote that I showed it to her. And it was about Squanto. It was an Indian who would help the pilgrims when they came to America. It was around Thanksgiving, and they had a joint, when you're in elementary school, a joint celebration
Sure.
with several classes. And she had me read it in front of that class. And I remember the kids clapping. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And so I became a writer, and I became a published writer that day. I always liked history, and I understood the logic of history. In some ways, it's like math, because there's a causal relationship that you could trace. 1 + 1 creates something new, just like Napoleon and Elba creates a situation.
Sure.
Yeah. The best advice I got was from an English teacher who told me to major in history because you're good at it, you like it, and it'll teach you how to write about people. And that worked out well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned you're a newspaper man, a former newspaper man. What was your experience like as a journalist?
Man, I loved that. It was being an instant historian. Like every day, back in those days, you'd come into work, check your mailbox, and it could be anything from go meet the vice president to go interview this bum sleeping under a freeway bridge. You just had to go. And so I love being a generalist. And it suited me perfectly because, I'm a Trivial Pursuit sort of guy. I know a lot of weird stuff. And so eventually, every newspaper that I worked for, and I worked for 7, I became known as the guy that you get if the president or somebody comes to town, because most of the reporters would be scared of that kind of stuff. If an author came to town, they'd
Sure.
throw me their book because
Yeah.
they, you know, and so, man, I worked my way from being a gopher to being an editorial writer, which is the top of the heap in the writing part of the newspaper. And for me, it was like heaven. So I had a good career in newspapers, and yeah, I still miss it.
You still miss it. And then how did you get involved in the editing, writing, and publishing of books from journalism?
When I was working for the Herald Tribune, they started a book section, but they didn't have a book columnist. And so I said, I read a lot. Do you mind if and I was an editorial writer at the time. And so they said, give it a try. And in no time, I had the book column going. But what I found was that book columnists back then were very snotty towards self-published authors. Some of the books really weren't that good, but I'll tell you, I read some books from Random House that are just as bad.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I would review self-published authors, and I'd see mistakes that they could have taken care of. And I still make some of them. Now I understand why. But the point is, I was working at the Sun by then, and because of a dispute, I wound up being denied the right to write a column. And for me, Bill, that was as if someone had cut off my right arm. Because for the 10 years of my 20-year newspaper career, I had a column. And so it became a part of my identity. That caused me to go into a real depression until I realized that my factory is in my head and my home's in my heart. And I was giving these people the power to make me feel bad. And so I quit the newspaper, like the next day, and started the publishing business. And that's how it happened. That was my epiphany.
Oh, wow. And you mentioned some writers, or you mentioned that you read a lot. What writers have inspired you or influenced you?
I really can't tell you because I read so much.
So much.
Case in point, because I was a bright young black guy, I always wound up in special classes. I was treated sort of differently. And when you're treated like that, sometimes you get a different idea of where you fit into the world. When I was 14, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And suddenly I saw where I really fit in. And I started seeing the world around me. And so that book awakened me.
It was by Alex Haley?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. That awakened me. When I was 8, my parents broke up. And I didn't have a male role model. I was at the library one day, and I saw Hornblower and the Atropos. That was part of a 13-volume series about Admiral Horatio Hornblower. And that book called out to me. And the book was about like 300 pages, and here I was like 8 years old. So I took it up and tried to check it out, and the librarian made me read a paragraph just to make sure I understood it. And I did. But I sort of modeled my perception of being a man on Horatio Hornblower. And so I say that to say, it's hard to say any one book.
Right.
But I read a lot, and I take a lot from the books I read.
Yeah. It seems, just remembering my own youth, when you start discovering books, that the books kind of find you rather than you finding the books.
It's like life. What they tell you, just be yourself. And what books did was help me find myself at an early age. And so I was a weird kid, a nerd. I liked to read.
Yeah.
You know, I was scared of girls, but still, I had a confidence few boys had because books found me and helped me find myself.
What do you think are some of the misconceptions the public has about writers and editors?
I think they're all weak, second-guessing, Monday morning quarterbacks. But what they don't understand is almost all the best books are based on real experiences. You know, people bled and hurt and cried and screamed to get those experiences on the page. So these are real people. Plus, you talk about guts and courage. Imagine telling people you will never even meet about falling in love, about getting ditched, about getting beat up, hurt, humiliated. That takes courage.
Yeah, it does.
But people You don't see that. They have images of effete guys writing with quills or, sipping lattes. But writing's hard work. It's very hard.
Yeah, facing an empty page day after day.
That's the mechanical part.
Yeah.
Just hitting those keys. I mean, think about that. There's a good novel will have about 120,000 words in it. Now think about making every one of those words and what your hands must feel like. So physically,
yes,
it's hard. But then there's the revelations. You're sharing stuff that you would only share with a lover or somebody close to you. Yeah, so it takes a lot of courage to write well and honestly. People should have more respect for writers.
That expression, all writing is biographical, whether you're writing a newspaper article or a comedy sketch or a short story or a poem.
That's life. I mean, think about dating. Whoever you're dating, they bring their whole life to that date, and so do you. And so yes, it has to be, which means the more intelligent and well-versed and well-rounded the writer is, the better the story, because they have a larger base to draw from.
Base of life,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, is the skill set of a writer and editor, since you've done both and done both successfully, they seem like they're similar, but yet there's probably some differences.
They're very different. Hemingway said it best. He said, "Write drunk, edit sober." So, you read stuff like by Carlos Castaneda or some of Henry Miller's early stuff, and you can tell they're like stoned out of their mind. I mean, there's that poem, Omar Khayyam, I think it is, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He's the guy that wrote the one about the albatross.
Right.
And all these guys were under the influence of something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then they got a good editor who wasn't. And so where I'm going with all of that, in a nutshell, is writers, their job is to be creative, to make stuff. The worst thing to do is to try to do two jobs after every word. Maybe I should put that in. Just vomit your words out.
Yeah.
Let it go. And once you get in that stream, you'll find your media. Then you give it to somebody who's distanced enough to see the curve of the earth, that has the aesthetic distance to tell you you're talking stuff here, or this is the real good stuff. Somebody detached.
Yeah.
I can't do it with my stuff because everything's great. I would think it is. Yeah.
So the writer is kind of like the child that's just shooting for the stars, and maybe the editor is the parent that helps guide them there. Perhaps?
In the best relationship, it's two equals. I'm working with a woman now. I've been working with her for almost 2 years on a memoir she's doing about the woman that changed her life, her grandmother. And, we become friends. Her mom isn't doing well. My mom passed a while back, and, we console each other.
Sure.
And we speak as equals who know their roles. If this were a two-man airplane, I would be the bombardier, she would be the pilot. There are times when we switch positions, but we work as equals. And that's what you want. And I can't stress that enough, because too many people in this writing business fancy themselves Svengalis. And too many writers think they have to find one mentor and cleave until that mentor. No, you have to keep an open mind and develop an honest, mutually respectful relationship with your editor. The worst thing in the world, and I don't mean to criticize you directly, but the worst thing in the world is for a writer or an editor to start thinking in a child-adult role.
Okay.
You just can't do that. Years ago, and I won't say why, I was taking a driver's ed class. And one of the things they do in that class is tell you that the driver who gets in, who stays at the speed limit, even though everybody has to go fast, they're just holding everybody down or honking their horn when somebody goes too fast. That's called the parent driver. And that parent driver is dangerous.
Yeah.
And the kid driver, of course, maybe I could make this turn, maybe I could do that. They're both dangerous. And so you bring that skill set to the writing process, and that parent will shut down the writer or make the writer write within the guardrails. And that doesn't work. So no, you've got to develop an equal relationship. Yeah.
I want to ask you a question I've always wanted to ask experienced writers. What causes, or what do you think is the underlying mechanics of writer's block? What do you think's going on there? Maybe you've experienced it. All writers face it at one time or another?
It's depression.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I never had writer's block, never in my life until 2020 was the worst year of my life. And I won't really tell you why. Some aspects of it continue now. But I lost 4 months on this book where I could not touch it.
Yeah.
And I was too depressed to work. But you know what also happened, Bill? I also felt I would pollute or corrupt this book if I brought my sadness to it. And so depression is the main source of writer's block.
Wow.
Yeah, and it could be the simple depression of thinking I'm not good enough. I'm scared to put another word out there. And again, I'm no clinician, I'm no psychologist, but what I find is the best way to get people past the writer's block is to put them in a comfort zone. And so what I say is, you've got this scene that you're having problems with. I want you to write me a letter. And just write the letter and describe the scene. And then Johnny shot him and they fell on the floor and write the letter to me. Because sometimes you take people out of their medium that scares them. This is a book, oh my God. Reduce it to a letter, which they could do. Write the letter for me, and we'll read it, I'll praise it, and we'll pass the block because they've just written their scene. And so it's depression, Bill.
Depression, wow. What are some of the characteristics of good writing?
I think good writing is euphonious. And euphonious is an old word that just means it sounds good. And you got to remember when you're writing, this sounds almost silly. You got to remember when you're writing that you're writing. You're not there to tell people this is what you mean or this is how you should read this. And so if you're conscious of that, you'll use words and phrases that'll conjure up the emotions that you want. And the first step is to write in a pleasing manner. Most of us actually read orally. When we read, we hear the book. And so you don't want words that confuse people. You want something that sounds so good it almost hypnotizes them. Can I give you an example?
Absolutely, please do.
What you also want to do is surprise people by using things that are just enough out of context to make them say, what? But that works. So remember, this is a history book, and this is the first page of the history book. The father of President Warren G. Harding once told him that if he were a girl, he'd always be in the family way. That's a terrible thing to say about anyone, but it speaks to a sense of wanting to be liked and a susceptibility to bright promises and big dreams. And such a description can easily be applied to Charlotte County. It's in the DNA, born of a land bordered by rivers debouching on fertile bays and a bountiful harbor, a land well watered and ready for, you see what I mean?
Yeah, it's flows, it's...
Yeah, but it's a history book.
I know, but
yeah.
you make the history sing in a sonorous way.
That's right. And so at that point, it's like the backbeat to a song. You ever like some songs you just keep humming, can't get it out of my head?
Yeah.
That's what you want to establish with good writing. And people don't even realize it, but then they realize, damn, I just learned this and this.
Right. And a backbeat has a hook, too.
Yes, there you
know?
go. There you go. So that's the key to it's really craft. So it's more, I mentioned earlier, vomiting your words out. That's the first step. But then you go back and pick and choose and use your ear.
Yeah.
Microsoft Word now has a device where it'll read back stuff to you.
Oh,
And that's just fascinating. I sort of have a built-in oral ear, but a lot of writers I respect will actually read aloud just to make sure it does have that beat.
Now, besides writing, you're also involved in doing oral presentations on everything from history and local history to African American issues. And tell us a little bit about that activity and experience that you...
That's just, for years as a journalist, I believe that I should stay out of the news. I shouldn't be an activist. I should just watch people all day, write about them, they go home. In 2001, there was a arrest of a black guy on the east side of Punta Gorda that was so, they didn't have to do everything they did, running through yards, jumping over cars, you know, just scaring people. And so a group of people from the community came to me and asked me to help them organize a discussion group, a race relations group. There's a national model called study circles that they familiarized me with. And I really didn't want to do it. But I realized I was the only prominent black person in town because I had a column that ran every week with my picture on it. And so I didn't want to step out, but I had no choice. Who else would? And that sort of changed me because I started seeing that prior to that, I had used being an impartial journalist as a fig leaf, as an excuse to go home and drink beer every day. But I realized I had to become a part of things. And so, yeah, I started speaking after the 9/11 tragedy. I don't know if you were here back then.
Oh, yes, I was.
Yeah, some people set fire to a display at the mosque up here on Harborview Road. Scared the hell out of those people, and they were scared. And so I went to them and asked them would they participate in a study circles event where we invited everyone in the county who wanted to come talk to a Muslim, sit down in this guided discussion group, and let's talk about what's going on. And the county came through. I'll never forget the first night, because this was a 10-week process. There was a line stretching all the way out to Harborview Road. And these were people who just wanted to learn, but they had never had a forum or a medium to sit down with a Muslim and talk to them. And so from there, I started organizing race relations groups. Last year, I gave 20 Black History Month speeches in February.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, but it's, I've got the information. People need it down here. I mean, this isn't a haven of diversity. And so ever since those people came to me and got me off my butt and made me start doing something, I've been doing those kind of things, Bill.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, with all the things that you're involved in, do you have any time in your schedule for hobbies or leisure pursuits or?
I'm laughing because my hobby's reading.
Yeah. Well,
and I love to read.
you love to read. That's great.
Yeah, one of the best gifts I ever got about 5 years ago, my wife gave me a Kindle. And I was really, I'm a book publisher, so I was into paper, and I sneered at it. But Bill, now I can read like 5 books a week with a Kindle.
Because you can adjust the font, you can...
When I was a boy, we lived in a little row house in Baltimore, and I had my own room. But if I turned the light on, my sisters in the next room would see it, and they'd yell and tell my mother, "Jimmy's up reading." And so I would take my book, go into the bathroom, climb into the bathtub, because you could turn the light on and there was a door there. And so I could stay up to 2 or 3 and read. And so I say that to say one of the great things about a Kindle, it's got its own light. So you can read.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, it's like one of the greatest things ever invented. I love Kindles. So I read a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, this has been Center Stage Charlotte County. I want to thank you, James Abraham, for spending some time with us. It's been a fascinating discussion with you. I've learned a tremendous amount and look forward to your book. If you could let us know what the title of your book is again.
Okay, Century, A People's History of Charlotte County. And I'll just say Howard Zinn influenced me a lot. He wrote A People's History of the United States. And the book is so good that conservatives ban it. And so my goal was to write a people's history of Charlotte County.
Very good. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, Bill.
Sure.